Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome once again to Change the Questions, the show where we take a question about professional wrestling and answer it. We really need to think better intros. My name is Paul Laporte. Joining me as always is my partner in crime, Mike Miner. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. A little more on the ball, I guess, than you are today.
Maybe a little bit.
I don't know.
So, the question that we are going to be answering today is actually one that's pretty near and dear to my heart, considering the fact that before we did this show and before we did this website, I actually did podcasting and broadcast radio for mixed martial arts for about 10 years. So this one actually is pretty close to my wheelhouse. And the question is, should WWE have purchased UFC? Now, for those of you who don't know, UFC was not always the money-making juggernaut it is today.
No. It was not.
Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were actually up for sale. The company was up for sale. And at which time, Shane McMahon, Vince's son, tried to convince Vince to purchase the company. Now, this is relevant because Shane has just recently returned to WWE television, and their business disagreements is kind of almost being made into part of the storyline. Shane tried to convince Vince to purchase WCW. WCW? That's wrong. He did that. He tried to convince him to purchase the UFC for... I don't remember what the exact price tag was, but it was very cheap. It was like millions of dollars, and not like less than $10 million, I believe.
Well, think of it like how WCW was bought. If we have to put it into perspective, WCW used to be this juggernaut in the professional wrestling industry, and it was bought for, UFC, a very meager amount.
UFC went in the reverse direction where it was up for sale for a very small amount, and now today is worth roughly $3.5 billion.
Yeah, they got a shot in the arm and when Zuffa came along.
And there's been speculation for quite some time that the reason for Shane and Vince's real-life kind of separation partially is because Vince didn't trust Shane and never went with any of Shane's business ideas. And this was one of them, and Shane was kind of furious about the fact that UFC is a huge money-making juggernaut now, and Vince wasn't smart enough or didn't take his advice to buy it.
Hey, come on, let's be real. The XFL was going somewhere.
Yeah, that's true.
The
so
WBF
instead of buying UFC, he decided to go with the XFL.
Come on, man. Let's go get some Ico Pro weightlifting systems.
Watch the newest WBF pay-per-view.
Yes, oh yes.
So, what do you think? Do you think that WWE should have bought the UFC back in the early 2000s?
No. No, because, who knows what they would have done with it. I don't know if they would have known what to do with it. I was joking about Ico Pro, and I was joking about the WBF and the XFL, and those ventures didn't work out. If, their main bread and butter, I guess, is trying to entertain people and get as much longevity out of their talent as they can, and I just don't see them really succeeding with the UFC. I think they try to stick to different forms of entertainment besides, legit fighting, and they're doing movies now, and I think that's as far as they would ever want to go. So,
I can see that WWE does not have the best track record when it comes to other forms of entertainment beyond professional wrestling. However,
shut up, Junior.
Yeah, my cats are currently trying to kill each other in the other room. I say let them. However, I think that if they had purchased... The thing is that previously WWE has always kind of tried to buy things and move into realms where there was already some sort of dominant force. They started the XFL, the NFL is a dominant force. They go into movies, there's a dozen movie studios that are doing things better than they do. If they had bought the UFC back in the early 2000s, yes, UFC was very... instrumental. Zuffa specifically, the company that bought it, the Fertittas and Dana White were very instrumental into making the UFC bigger. But I think the thing
they gave it
is,
a shot in the arm.
The explosion was more the explosion of the sport of mixed martial arts, and not necessarily the company of the UFC. It's just the UFC happened to be the biggest one at the time. I believe that if WWE could have gotten in on the ground floor of that, maybe they would have not done as good a job as Zuffa, but I think they could have rode that wave of just people being exposed to mixed martial arts, and not in the human cockfighting way, but in the way of this is just the ultimate fighting sport, pardon the pun.
But do you think they would have tried to push their, they did Tough Enough back in the day, right? 98, they did Tough Enough. Tough Enough, excuse me, Brawl for All. They've done Tough Enough as well, yeah. But they did Brawl for All in 98, and, to try to do something similar, and it didn't work out too well, do you think they would have thrown their WWE talent into there if it was a desperate kind of situation where they're not making money from it? Do you think they would try to get that star power?
I mean, or do you maybe, think, but
even look at the early 2000s with the UFC. They had some names in there that they had the look of professional wrestlers, and they
and that's the point I wanted to make
is
that one of the things that caused UFC to get so big and so popular
personalities
is that yes, they kind of borrowed a lot of things from WWE. They borrowed kind of guys focusing more on the interpersonal relationships between potential fighters leading up to a fight. And a lot of people don't remember this, but when The Ultimate Fighter, the show that was effectively responsible for the explosion of UFC and the explosion in popularity of mixed martial arts, where was that show first advertised on? Monday Night Raw.
Yeah.
It was shown on Monday Night Raw.
My eyebrows raised when you said that. I said, wow, that's, yeah.
Because it was a lead-in, because it was on Spike.
Yeah.
And the WWE programming was seen as a good way to introduce people to that.
Synergy, they call it.
Exactly. So if WWE decides to have a program like that, or decides to do something similar, and then showcase it on WWE programming, or maybe it was WWF at the time still, then they would have been able to expose it to that wider audience. You make a good point with the Brawl for All, but I think them actually going into a full mixed martial arts company, where at that point, the Athletic Commission rules were already starting to get way more established for this sport. So I think it kind of would have ended up in the cage, in terms of the sport, in the same place it is now, with your weight classes and your unified commission rule set. I think it all would have ended up in those places because that's where it was going anyways. It just kind of naturally rolled into there after Zuffa bought it. I think WWE being able to use their media juggernaut combined with this new sport, like I said, this isn't football. People don't know football. People don't already have a benchmark for good football. I mean, if you take a look at The Ultimate Fighter, the show was not about the best fighters in the world at the time. Those guys were low-level fighters, some of which had a handful of fights at best.
Who's the hungriest?
They just happen to have good personalities, and MMA has this nice quality of, even if two guys aren't the best fighters in the world, if they're on a similar level, they're going to put on a good fight. They're going to put on an entertaining fight. And that's not necessarily true of professional wrestling. You could find two crappy guys, two wrestling students who are at the same level are not going to put on as good a match as two guys who have been doing it for 10, 15 years. Whereas in mixed martial arts, that's kind of, there's a possibility of that happening.
I mean, a legit fight's a legit fight.
So I think
that's something that's set up. There's a skill that goes into it. There's, I've said it in the past, and I'm sure it's been said in the past by other people as well. I think even Jesse Ventura has, kind of phrased it in a way that it's violent ballet. And it takes skill in ballet to do something.
I also think that if WWE had purchased the UFC, I think that, number one, I think that they would have been able to get pay-per-view deals better.
Yeah,
I think
they have that leverage.
Their lobbying in terms of getting mixed martial arts legalized in states would have been quicker. They probably would
have called it entertainment.
New York probably would have. No, they probably still would have been sport. But it's funny because I think if the WWE purchased UFC, I bet you that New York State would have been one of the very first states to legalize MMA.
Yeah,
whereas
bet your
it is the only territory left on the globe that still MMA is not legalized in. I guarantee you it would have been one of the first ones after WWE purchased UFC to change their mind on it.
Yeah, I could see that, but on the other hand, I could see WWE making it kind of gimmicky. I can see everybody being dressed up at like Farouk Assad with the gladiator helmets and the get-ups. And
that is a concern. That's a completely legitimate concern.
Instead of a cage surrounding the area, they're going to have like shark tanks. And
no, I definitely see
with John Tent on the outside of the shark tanks laughing maniacally.
I think WWE, it could have been more gimmicky, and there would have been more questions of, this is just fake. I think that there would have been concern about that initially, but
you see the guys getting beat up in the ring, and you see them getting cuts and bruises, and then
and the fact that if it is sanctioned with the athletic commission,
it's not Byron Saxton passing a blood packet to Roman Reigns. It's going to be
it would be a thing where if it is sanctioned with the athletic commission, I think that there would be, like I said, some skepticism at first, but then again, there was skepticism with the UFC at first, anyways.
Oh yeah, and there's
still to this day.
Yeah, exactly. You got people questioning that to this day.
Question the legitimacy of the competition. So
I mean, Elite XC. Look at the whole thing with them about 10 years ago. With,
I think that they could have that using their
Slice and what's his name, Petrozelli?
Kimbo Slice and Seth Petrozelli. Yeah. Using their marketing machine to promote the UFC, had they purchased it, would have reaped great rewards for them. But in terms of we should not have Jim Ross doing commentary for this. We should not have any WWE guys competing in this. We should keep these completely separate.
Yeah.
Maybe don't even, maybe don't even really mention to anybody who isn't, hip to the inside baseball of the business of professional wrestling that they own, that WWE owns it, leave that. Kind of like what they wanted to do originally with WCW when they purchased it, except they need to stick to their guns.
I was going to mention that. That's the problem, is they have a tremendously hard time trying to separate their brands and not say, look, it's a WWE brand. We're going to make...
Yeah, but I think the fact that they're different things would help.
But yeah, it might help, but on the other hand, I don't know if they have enough,
restraint?
Yeah. They don't have enough willpower to not mix them and dabble them together. And
that's fair.
That's a huge problem.
You're absolutely
look at
right.
ECW. Look at WCW.
Again, those were professional wrestling organizations.
Still.
I mean, you can say with the XFL, they did the same thing, but...
And even the XFL, they had friggin' Jesse Ventura, a former wrestler, join there. I think Jim Ross was there doing commentary.
Yeah, that could have been a problem.
They mix everything together, and they have such a problem not doing that. They say, well, this guy, they know him. Yeah. Or this personality, they know them.
You're right. They would need to have the restraint to let it grow and maybe struggle a little bit on its own before it turned into something bigger, instead of hitting the panic button and going, it's Stone Cold Steve Austin, you're guest commentator for UFC.
Summer Rae, you're in the next movie. Let's go.
Yeah. They would need to not panic and let it, potentially, even if it suffered a little bit at first, let it suffer. Let it go through its growing pains.
Yeah.
And let it grow to what it be. Would it be as big as the UFC is today? I don't know.
What did you mention earlier? Just not a couple minutes ago. You mentioned them just kind of putting them under separate umbrellas, separate parts under the main umbrella, which is WWE. Like a Marvel or a LucasArts. Like you have them
as Disney,
you have them as like separate companies under this big, this big giant, and you don't need to have all these, different experiments dabble together. It's not necessary. Yeah. I mean, you could have a UFC, you could have a WWE, you could have a films division. I was going somewhere with this, and now it escapes me. Tremendous.
Well, I'm going to kind of wrap things up, at least with my final thoughts, and then we'll go to yours. Yeah. Like I said, I understand the concerns you have, and the kind of what you'll probably state here, but in terms of WWE having a poor track record with other things that aren't professional wrestling, but I think that the fact that it would be a new thing that people would be interested and excited about, coupled with the fact that the UFC kind of took off because they had that WWE marketing to kind of give them a little bit of boost. Would UFC be as successful as it is now? I don't know. But would it have been a smart purchase and a good investment for WWE? I think that beyond a shadow of a doubt it would have been. I think it would still be around to this day. Would it be as successful? I don't know. But I think that for the meager price tag it could have been purchased for, even if it's a quarter as successful as it is now, that's still a gigantic return on your investment.
You know what? I'm going to go the route of I just see them treating it like another toy. That's, they get bored with it, they toss it to the side, they don't do anything with it. They try for a little while and they go, why isn't it doing anything? Work for us. I mean, if they try to put it under a different imprint, like comics. DC Comics has their Vertigo imprint. Marvel has theirs, which is escaping me at the moment for whatever reason. I'm freaking terrible, huge comic fan, but I can't think of their imprint. But if they kept it under a different name, as a different kind of company, then yeah, it could work. But I just see them getting too bored with it, trying to mingle too many personalities from one world to another, and it just wouldn't mesh well, and they would just kind of toss it to the side. And they probably, like I said, they probably try to gimmick it up, further than it is. UFC has an 8-sided cage. That was their main gimmick. And their other gimmick early on was, look, there's no rules, except for maybe, what was it? Fish hooking or something? Or
no eye gouging.
No eye gouging.
No fish hooking. And strikes to the throat, I think, initially. And then groin strikes came in not long after that.
Yeah. So, I mean, UFC had that going for them early on. They had gimmicky stuff going on early on. Even today, the 8-sided cage, it was gimmicky, but now it's replicated by everybody else. It was something that worked. I think WWE would try to put too many gimmicks into it, too many, they would try to sensationalize it, and it just, you don't need to sensationalize it. It does the work itself. And that's all you need. That's something that a lot of companies, a lot of, business owners would kill to have, is something that kind of works on its own. And you just do some of the quote-unquote light work. It's not light work at all, but, you do what you got to do, and it'll, you set it up and let it go, and it'll work.
And you don't believe that WWE could do that?
I don't know if they can do that without panicking.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of Change the Questions. Let us know what you think. Do you think WWE should have bought UFC back in the early 2000s? Leave us a comment in the comments below. Also, be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying what you're listening to. If you're listening to this on iTunes, be sure to leave us a nice 5-star review. Say some nice words about us. Also, be sure to check out all of our other shows, which I neglected to mention at the end of our last episode of CTQ. On Monday, we have Time Warp. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have Change the Questions. Wednesdays, we have Booking About a Wrestler. And on Fridays, we have Let's Play TEW. Also, be sure to check out our brand new website at changingtheqs.com, which is changingtheqs.com. Where we have all of our audio and video shows posted up there, as well as some written articles that you can only get on that website. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Changing the Qs, same thing, at Changing the QS. Be sure to like us on Facebook, just search for Changing the Questions there. If you want to send us a good old-fashioned email, be sure to do that at changingthequestions@gmail.com. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. My name is Paul Laporte. That is Mike Miner.
Yeah, I'm going to go read some Howard the Duck comics.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.